The phone call that destroyed my life came on a Thursday morning while I was rushing to get my kids ready for school. I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring. "Is this Natalie Morrison?" The voice was professional, crisp, and immediately put me on edge. "Yes, this is Natalie." "Who's calling?" "Ms. Morrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates law firm. I'm representing Mrs. Stephanie Morrison in her divorce proceedings against your brother-in-law, Marcus Morrison. I need to speak with you about some financial assets that appear to be in your name." I stopped dead in the middle of packing my daughter's lunch. "I'm sorry, what? What assets?" "Ms. Morrison, are you aware that you own controlling interests in 17 different companies and have approximately $3.2 million in various bank accounts across 3 states? The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the kitchen counter. My 6-year-old daughter Lily looked up from her cereal bowl with concern. "Mommy, are you okay?" I picked up the phone with shaking hands. "There's been some mistake. I'm a part-time bookkeeper. I don't own any companies, and I definitely don't have millions of dollars anywhere. Ms. Morrison, I think we need to meet in person. Are you available this afternoon?" 2 hours later, I sat in Jennifer Walsh's elegant downtown office, staring at a stack of documents that made my head spin. According to the papers spread across her mahogany desk, I was apparently a very wealthy woman. "These are incorporation papers for Morrison Holdings LLC, filed 8 months ago with you listed as the sole proprietor," Jennifer explained, sliding a document toward me. "And here are bank statements showing deposits totaling $1.8 million into an account at First National Bank in your name." I studied the signatures on the documents, and my blood ran cold. They looked exactly like my handwriting, but I had never signed any of these papers. "I don't understand," I said. "I've never seen these documents before. I never opened these accounts or started any companies." Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. "Ms. Morrison, I believe you. Which means someone has been using your identity to hide assets from my client's divorce proceedings. Someone with access to your personal information and the ability to forge your signature convincingly." "Marcus," I whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. My brother-in-law Marcus had always been the successful one in the family. While my husband David worked as a high school teacher and I did part-time bookkeeping for small businesses, Marcus was a corporate lawyer who drove luxury cars and owned a mansion in the suburbs. He and his wife Stephanie lived a lifestyle that David and I could only dream of. But over the past year, I'd noticed tension between Marcus and Stephanie. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where they barely spoke to each other, and Stephanie had started making comments about finally seeing Marcus for who he really is. 3 months ago, David had mentioned that Marcus and Stephanie were getting divorced. "It's going to be ugly," he said. "Stephanie thinks Marcus has been hiding money from her, and she's hired some high-powered attorney to find it." At the time, I felt sorry for Marcus. Divorce was expensive and emotionally devastating, and I assumed Stephanie was just being vindictive. Now I realized she had been right to be suspicious. "Jennifer," I said slowly, "what exactly are you accusing Marcus of?" "I'm not accusing him of anything yet. But based on the timeline of these asset transfers and the fact that they coincide with his wife filing for divorce, it appears someone has been systematically moving Marcus's wealth into accounts and companies bearing your name." She pulled out another document, a bank transfer record showing a deposit of $500,000 into my account just 2 days after Stephanie had served Marcus with divorce papers. "The problem, Ms. Morrison, is that regardless of who actually made these transfers, you are legally responsible for the assets in your name. If this goes to court, you could be charged as an accessory to fraud and asset concealment." My mouth went dry. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you could face criminal charges, substantial fines, and civil liability for the full amount of the hidden assets. Even if you're completely innocent, proving that in court could take years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees." I felt like I was drowning. "What do I do?" "First, we need to figure out exactly how your identity was compromised. Do you have any ideas how Marcus might have gained access to your personal information?" Unfortunately, I had several ideas. Marcus was family, which meant he'd been to our house countless times over the years. He'd helped David and me with legal paperwork when we bought our house, and I'd trusted him with copies of our tax returns when he offered to review them for errors. As a corporate lawyer, he knew exactly what information was needed to open bank accounts and incorporate businesses. More troubling, I remembered Marcus offering to help me improve my credit score about a year ago. He'd asked for copies of my credit reports and social security number, claiming he could help me consolidate some old debt. I'd been grateful for his help and hadn't thought twice about providing the information. He had access to everything, I told Jennifer. My social security number, bank account information, copies of my driver's license and passport. I trusted him completely. Jennifer nodded grimly. That's how most identity theft happens, from someone close to the victim. The question now is how we prove you weren't complicit in the scheme. Over the next week, Jennifer and I worked together to trace the paper trail of my mysterious wealth. What we discovered was both impressive and terrifying in its sophistication. Marcus had created an entire financial empire using my identity. He'd incorporated multiple shell companies, opened bank accounts in 3 different states, and even purchased real estate in my name. The forged signatures were perfect, clearly the work of someone who'd had plenty of time to practice. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. In his rush to hide assets before the divorce proceedings intensified, he'd been sloppy about covering his digital tracks. Jennifer hired a forensic accountant who discovered that all of the businesses registered in my name had been managed from Marcus's office computer. Every financial transaction, every document filing, every business decision had been made from his IP address during his normal business hours. This is actually good news, Jennifer explained. It proves you couldn't have been involved in managing these assets, since you were at your regular job during the times when these transactions were being made. But while we were building a case to prove my innocence, Marcus was apparently realizing that his scheme was falling apart. He started calling me multiple times a day, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Natalie, we need to talk. There's been some confusion about some business matters, and I need your help to sort things out. When I didn't return his calls, he showed up at my house one evening while David was at a school board meeting. I was alone with the kids when I heard his car pull into our driveway. Aunt Natalie. My niece Emma called out when she saw her father through the window. Daddy's here. I'd been watching Emma and her little brother Jake for the evening while Stephanie attended a meeting with her attorney. The irony of babysitting Marcus's children while he was trying to frame me for fraud wasn't lost on me. Kids, why don't you go play upstairs for a few minutes while Daddy and I talk? I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Marcus looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, and wearing the same suit he'd had on 2 days earlier. This wasn't the polished, successful lawyer I'd known for 8 years. Natalie, thank God. We need to discuss this misunderstanding before it gets out of hand. Misunderstanding? I stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, you've been using my identity to hide millions of dollars from your wife. That's not a misunderstanding, that's fraud. You don't understand the situation. Stephanie is trying to destroy me. She wants to take everything I've worked for my entire life. I was just trying to protect some assets until we could work out a fair settlement. By framing me for financial crimes, Marcus had the audacity to look hurt. I would never let anything happen to you. I was going to transfer everything back into my name once the divorce was finalized. You were never supposed to be involved. But I am involved. Stephanie's attorney says I could face criminal charges. Do you understand what you've done to my family? For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely remorseful. Natalie, I'll fix this. I'll transfer everything back immediately and tell Stephanie's lawyer that it was all my doing. It's too late for that. The transactions have already been flagged by the court. There's going to be an investigation regardless of what you do now. Marcus slumped into one of our kitchen chairs, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. I never meant for it to go this far. The divorce proceedings got so ugly so fast, and Stephanie was threatening to take the kids. I panicked. So you decided to ruin my life instead? I thought I could fix everything before anyone noticed. I have friends in the banking industry, and I know how to manipulate the system. It should have been simple. Looking at my brother-in-law, this man I'd trusted with my family's financial information, I felt a mixture of rage and pity. He'd thrown away his career, his marriage, and his relationship with his family because he couldn't bear to lose money in a divorce. Marcus, what you've done isn't just illegal, it's unforgivable. You've put my children's future at risk to protect your own assets. I'll make it right, he said desperately. I'll hire you the best lawyers. I'll pay for everything. With what money? The money you stole using my name. The next few months were a nightmare of legal proceedings, forensic accounting, and media attention. Marcus's scheme had been so extensive that it made local news when the investigation became public. "Prominent attorney accused of massive identity theft" was not the headline I'd ever expected to see with my name in the article. Marcus was arrested and charged with identity theft, fraud, asset concealment, and about a dozen other financial crimes. His law license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case, and Stephanie was granted a restraining order preventing him from contacting his children. But my troubles were far from over. Even though Jennifer had helped prove my innocence, I still had to deal with the practical consequences of having my identity stolen on such a massive scale. My credit report looked like a financial horror story. I was listed as the owner of businesses I'd never heard of, responsible for debts I'd never incurred, and connected to financial transactions that would take years to untangle. Banks froze accounts they thought might be connected to the fraud investigation. The IRS launched their own inquiry into my unreported income from the shell companies. I had to hire an accountant just to file my taxes because my financial situation had become so complicated. Worst of all, I lived in constant fear that some aspect of Marcus's scheme would surface that I couldn't explain. What if there were more forged documents out there? What if investigators decided I had been complicit after all? The breakthrough came 6 months after Marcus's arrest, when Jennifer called with news that changed everything. "Natalie, Marcus's attorney contacted me this morning. He wants to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Full confession, complete cooperation with the asset recovery, and a detailed statement absolving you of any involvement in the scheme. In exchange, prosecutors would recommend a lighter sentence." I was suspicious. Why would he do that now? Because his own attorney finally convinced him that he's facing 20 years in federal prison if he goes to trial. This scheme was too big and too well documented for him to claim ignorance or minimal involvement. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courthouse listening to Marcus formally confess to using my identity to hide $3.2 million in assets from his divorce proceedings. He read a prepared statement detailing exactly how he'd forged my signature, used my personal information, and created an elaborate network of shell companies and bank accounts. "I want to state clearly and unequivocally that my sister-in-law, Natalie Morrison, had no knowledge of these activities and no involvement in concealing assets," he said, his voice barely audible. "She is a victim of my crimes, not an accomplice." The formal confession cleared my name legally, but the personal damage was already done. David struggled with the betrayal by his own brother, and our marriage became strained under the weight of the financial and emotional stress. How could I not have seen what kind of person Marcus really was? David asked repeatedly. "He's my brother. I should have known he was capable of something like this." Emma and Jake, Marcus's children, were perhaps the biggest victims of his crimes. Their father went from being a respected lawyer and family man to a convicted felon serving a federal prison sentence. Stephanie struggled as a single mother while trying to recover the assets Marcus had hidden. The strangest part of the entire ordeal was discovering that Marcus's financial situation hadn't been as dire as he'd claimed. The forensic accountants revealed that he was worth approximately $4.8 million at the time of his divorce filing. Even if he'd lost half his assets to Stephanie, he would still have been a wealthy man. He destroyed his entire life to avoid giving up money he didn't even need, Jennifer told me after the sentencing. Some people become so obsessed with winning that they lose sight of what they're actually fighting for. Marcus was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to everyone affected by his crimes, including my legal fees and the costs of repairing my credit. Stephanie received the divorce settlement she'd been entitled to all along, plus damages for Marcus's attempt to defraud her. 3 years later, my life has finally returned to something resembling normal. My credit has been restored, the IRS has closed their investigation, and I no longer wake up in the middle of the night worried about federal agents knocking on my door. But the experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more cautious about trusting people with my personal information, even family members. I monitor my credit reports religiously and have fraud alerts on all my accounts. Most importantly, I learned that financial crimes aren't just about money. They're about the destruction of trust and relationships. Marcus didn't just steal assets. He stole my sense of security, my faith in family bonds, and my assumption that people I loved would never deliberately harm me. David and I eventually went to counseling to work through the trauma of his brother's betrayal. It took time, but we emerged stronger and more unified as a couple. We also became advocates for identity theft victims, speaking at community events about the warning signs and protective measures people can take. Marcus will be released from prison in 5 years, but he'll never be part of our lives again. The trust he broke can't be repaired, and the damage he caused to his children's relationship with their father is permanent. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't answered Jennifer's phone call that Thursday morning. Would Marcus have successfully hidden his assets? Would I have discovered the fraud when the IRS came after me for unreported income? But mostly, I'm grateful that the truth came out when it did. Because living with a lie, even unknowingly, is still living a lie. And the only way to build a real life is on a foundation of truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. The brother-in-law I thought I knew never existed. The trust one placed in him was misguided from the beginning. But the strength I discovered in myself during the darkest period of my life, that was real, and that's something Marcus can never steal from me.